Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's 2022 QCDR Kickoff webinar. This is going to be the first webinar of our 2022 QCDR series, and as you know, we like to do these every few months just to help people stay on track with their MIPS submissions. So my name is Zach Smith. I'm a quality program specialist with our registries team here at ACR. And just some reminders about today's webinar. We will record this presentation. We'll send a link of the recording to all registrants, as well as the slide deck. And through the presentation, if you want to enter your questions into the Q&A box, we'll try to answer as many as we can as we go. And then at the end, if we have some time for Q&A, we'll read those questions out loud. So here's what we're going to try to cover today. We're going to start off talking about the 2021 final scores. We're going to talk about the 2022 EUC, the Extreme and Uncontrollable Circumstances exemption. And then we're going to go into some major updates with 2022 MIPS. Mainly, we're going to focus on the quality category changes, as well as some new QCDR measures that we're offering starting this year. And then we'll end with a general overview of grid data submission and MIPS measure data submission, followed by Q&A. So first, I wanted to add a quick note about 2021 final scores. These aren't out yet, but they will be out sometime this summer. So be looking out for that in probably July or August. As you probably already know, CMS did apply the automatic exemption to all MIPS eligible NPIs if they did not submit any performance categories for 2021. So if you didn't submit anything in 2021, you're likely to just get a neutral adjustment. And because of that automatic exemption, this means that positive adjustments may continue to be on the low side. So you might have noticed this in 2021 and 2020 and 2021, they also did the automatic exemption for those years. And that led to not a lot of people getting negative adjustments, which means the pool of money for the positive adjustments wasn't very large. Now, CMS also announced recently that the cost category for 2021 is going to be reweighted for all clinicians. So for radiologists, this was probably already going to be the case. Most radiologists are not getting a score for cost, but that might also affect scores a little bit. So all of that is going to be reweighted to quality for 2021. So again, those final scores will be available on the QPP portal. That's qpp.cms.gov. You have to have an account and log in to be able to see your score. And again, that'll be sometime this summer, probably July, maybe August. So I wanted to make some notes about the extreme and uncontrollable circumstances exemption. Like I said, in 2020 and 2021, they made this exemption automatic for anybody who didn't submit data. For 2022, they haven't given any sort of indication that it'll continue to be automatic, but the EUC still exists. So you're able to apply. You have to just go online and submit your application there. You can click this link here for more information. And that allows you to request reweighting of one or all of your MIPS categories to 0%, which would give you a neutral adjustment if you're fully exempt from MIPS. So that EUC policy will continue to allow physicians to request reweighting due to COVID. But again, they haven't indicated that this is going to be automatic. Now, it can be for other things such as, adverse weather events. I think they've granted EUC for, hurricanes, things like that, that have affected practices across the country. So if you're planning to apply for this EUC, we recommend doing it sooner rather than later. Since it's not going to be automatic, you have to submit the application online, and it has to be done by December 31st at 8 p.m. Eastern. So just be aware of that if you're not planning to submit 2022 MIPS. So as far as the performance categories for 2022, not too much has changed for radiologists. Now for the overall program, quality has decreased to 30% of your overall score and cost has increased to 30%. but IA is still 15%, PI is still 25. And these are the weights that are probably going to be maintained for the rest of the MIPS program. The quality score was initially weighted higher, but CMS has gradually been lowering it so that quality and cost are both at 30%. Now, the reason I say that this won't really affect radiologists very much is because most radiologists were already getting cost and PI reweighted to the quality category. So effectively, you're still going to be getting 85% for quality and 15% for improvement activities, with a few exceptions, of course. So now let's go into sort of a general overview of 2022 MIPS, specifically what's changed for this year. So this year, the performance threshold is the highest it's ever been. It's going to be 75 points. Last year, it was 60 points. The year before that, it was 45 points. This means it's much more difficult to get a positive adjustment now. They're also getting rid of bonus points for the quality category. So you'll no longer get any bonus points for submitting additional outcome or high priority measures. This was something we really encouraged people to do in the past, just submit as many measures as possible. And the more measures you submit, the more bonus points you would get for your quality category. That's entirely gone now, unfortunately. And in addition to that, several MIPS measures have been removed, and also several measures have been capped at 7 points because of their topped out status. Now, we do have some new QCDR measures, and we really encourage you to look into submitting QCDR measures, because this may be the only way that you can actually achieve a positive adjustment for 2022, especially if you are a practice that only performs certain modalities. You might only have access to a handful of measures, and many of those measures may be capped at 7 points. And later in this presentation, I'll show a list of all the measures that were removed and all the measures that are capped at 7 points for this year. So I wanted to just put into perspective exactly how you need to be scoring in order to avoid a negative adjustment for 2022. So again, that high performance threshold is 75 points. If you score under 75 points, you'll get a negative payment adjustment. And if you score higher, you'll get some kind of positive payment adjustment. So I did two different equations here to explain what you need to score on average for each measure, whether you're a large practice or a small practice. And this is all assuming that you're going to have the PI category and cost reweighted. So the math is going to be a little bit different if you are submitting PI, or if for some reason some of the cost measures apply to you. So for most radiologists, this will be the case though. So what we're trying to look at here is how you need to score on each measure to achieve 75 points, which is just the basic neutral threshold. So we multiply X is the average score for each measure. We multiply that by 6, assuming you have 6 measures, and then we divide that score by 60 and multiply it by 85, 85 being the projected weight of your quality category. Then we add 15 points to it. That's assuming that you're getting full credit for the improvement activities category, which is 15 points. And that tells us that if you're a regular size practice with PI and cost reweighted, you need to score at least 7.05 points per measure just to get a neutral adjustment. So that means to get a positive adjustment, it's got to be higher than that on average. So that means if you have some measures that are lower than 7, that's fine, but you need your average measure score to be at least 7 to get that neutral adjustment. Now, for small practices, the weight of the improvement activities category is going to change for 2022. This is something they mentioned in the 2022 final rule, which I think is going to be beneficial to small practices. They will now grant 50% weight to the improvement activity category and 50% to quality. That's good news because most people get full credit for improvement activities. So that's an easy 50 points on your score. And so that's why if you do the calculation where you're expecting quality to have a weight of 50, you'll see that you only need to score an average of 5 points per quality measure. That's much easier. That means you can submit measures that are topped out, capped at 7 points, and it'll still probably put you over the threshold for a positive adjustment. So again, large practices really need to look at measures where they can score more than 7 points. Small practices, it's not as big of a deal for them. If they can get higher than 5 points per measure using standard MIPS measures, then that's totally fine. They can still get a decent score doing that. But we do recommend looking into the QCDR measures because many of those are benchmarked and are able to achieve up to 10 points. So if you don't already know what measures were removed for 2022, here's a list. The first one is one of our newer QCDR measures, ACRAD 39, which was the low dose CT for kidney stones measure. That one's gone. It was removed basically because it didn't have enough people reporting it, and the people who did report it all scored 100%. So CMS considered that to be a topped out measure and they removed it. It may come back at some point if we're able to collect more testing data for it, but for now it's not available for 2022. And then the rest of the measures are MIPS measures that were removed. Now the first three, not a lot of radiologists were reporting, so these might not affect you too much, but measure 195 and measure 225 were removed for 2022, and a lot of our users were submitting those measures. So that was the radiology stenosis measurement in carotid imaging reports, and then the reminder system for screening mammo measures. So a lot of people have relied on those measures over the last several years. They've been with us since the PQRS program, I believe. So just be aware you can't submit those measures this year. Now, in addition to those measures that were removed, there are a few more measures that are capped at 7 points. Some of these were also capped last year, so hopefully this isn't a big surprise for you. I've highlighted the ones that most radiologists have been reporting. The non-highlighted ones haven't had a lot of submissions, so again, they're not of such high concern. But measure 145, that's the fluoroscopy measure. Measure 147, that's the nuclear medicine bone scintigraphy measure. And then we've got 360, 364, 406, and 436. Especially 436, we've had a very high volume of people reporting that measure because the denominator for that measure is basically all CT exams. That's the utilization of dose lowering techniques measure. Now, I will say that ACR is making some efforts to revise some of the measures that we steward. We found that if we can change measures a bit, CMS will usually reset the benchmark, and that'll basically buy some time to calculate a new benchmark, which will hopefully not be topped out. One of those measures that we're intending to change for next year is 145. We also recently changed measure 405, which is why you're not seeing 405 on this list. 405 has a benchmark again, and it is considered topped out, but it's not capped at 7 points for now. So just be aware of all these measures. Many practices are submitting specifically these highlighted measures, and for all of them, you're not going to be able to get more than 7 points, and that's if you're scoring perfectly on them. But I do want to say there is good news because we offer 22 QCDR measures, and many of them are probably going to be applicable to your practice. We have our 6 report turnaround time measures. These are the ones that have been around forever. They're reported via GRID. So you have to be a user of the GRID registry to report them. And then we have our DIR measure, that's ACRAD 34. That measure requires participation in the dose index registry. And then we have our 6 GRID 2.0 measures. Those are the ones that were added in 2020. And those can be reported either via GRID or via simplified submission, where they're just reported via the MIPS portal. And the newest measures that we have are the 9 new measures that we licensed from the MSN QCDR. Those are also reported via the simplified submission method. So of the QCDR measures that we offer in the ACR registries, these are the ones that are currently benchmarked, and they're available for up to 10 points each. So if you're getting a very high score on all of these measures, you can get 10 points, which could make a big difference for your final score, especially with the performance threshold being raised like it is. So this includes all of the turnaround time measures, and these are for 6 different imaging modalities. If you don't perform all of these modalities at your facility, that's okay. You just submit the ones that you do perform. And that's 6 individual measures. So you could entirely submit grid turnaround time measures for your MIPS submission, and that would count. Of course, you can submit a combination of MIPS and QCDR measures if you want, or any combination of the two. You can do all MIPS measures, all QCDR measures, or a combination. And you can still submit more than 6 measures because CMS will continue to accept the 6 best measures. You just won't get any bonus points for submitting additional measures. Now, ACRAD 34, that's the DIR measure, the average DLP measure for CT exams. That one is also benchmarked, so you can get up to 10 points for that one as well. Now, as a reminder, these are our Grid 2.0 measures. I will say that 3 of them have had a very high participation rate over the last year or so. So we're hoping that these will become benchmarked soon, but as of right now, they don't have a benchmark. As you probably know, if you submit a non-benchmarked measure to CMS, you can potentially get a higher score for it than just the default 3 points. If CMS receives enough submissions, they will calculate a same year benchmark. And so one of these measures that would default to 3 points will instead be eligible for up to 10 points. So that's why we definitely recommend submitting these measures, even if they're not benchmarked. I should also mention that if nobody submits these measures, then they'll just be removed from the program because nobody's submitting them. Like I said, we do have 3 of these that we've had a lot of submissions for. That's ACRAD 36, the coronary artery calcification measure, ACRAD 37, that's the CTPA for pulmonary embolism measure, and then ACRAD 40, which is use of structured reporting in prostate MRI, the PIRADS measure. So hopefully on the horizon, there's a benchmark for at least those 3 measures, and potentially for 38, 41, and 42 if we get more submissions for those. And then here's a list of the new MSN measures that we added. Now, much like the Grid 2.0 measures, these measures are pretty new, so mostly they're not benchmarked. But the one I've highlighted here, MSN 15, which is a TIRADS measure, this one is benchmarked. So this is one that you can definitely get up to 10 points for. The others are in the same boat as Grid 2.0. If we have more submissions, then they're likely to get a benchmark. They can also be eligible for that same year benchmarking as well. So please look into these measures. Now, these are reported using the simplified submission method, which I'll go into in just a moment, and reported directly through the MIPS portal. So I wanted to touch on data submission, both for grid and for MIPS measures. So we'll start off talking about how to submit data for the grid turnaround time measures. This is what we call the standard exam level data template for grid. This is an Excel file where each column represents a different data element. Some of these data elements are required for all measures, some are only required for certain measures. And the screenshot that you're looking at here is basically showing you the fields that are required for calculating the report turnaround time measures. So you can either give the CPT code, which will tell us the modality of the exam, or you can just give the modality procedure. That's what you see in column L, and the number that you provide. If you type in 2, then that indicates that it's a CT exam, and so forth. You fill out one of those columns. That tells us what modality, which lets us know what denominator this measure should, or this patient record should go into. And then you provide the date the exam was completed, the time the exam was completed, and then the date the final report was signed, and the time that it was signed. We use that data to calculate the number of hours that it took to turn around the report. Now, there are several more fields that are available in this template file that are mostly used for the Grid 2.0 measures. So there is more to it. I just wanted to show kind of a snippet of it and what you would need to fill out in order to submit the turnaround time measures. Now, again, this data is submitted at the exam level. So that means each row in this spreadsheet represents an individual patient exam. So what you would do is populate this spreadsheet with all of the exams that you want to upload. You would upload it using the grid tab of your NRDR homepage. And now we'll talk a little bit about the simplified submission method that I mentioned earlier. This is something that we developed to use for the Grid 2.0 measures as sort of an alternative way to submit these and hopefully an easier way to submit them. And what we do for this is we use a file template that's pretty much based on the MIPS measure template. It's going to look really familiar to you if you've been using us for MIPS measure reporting. And you upload the file to the MIPS portal using the Upload Data tab, just like you do for MIPS measures. So you can see that these fields are basically identical to the MIPS measure template. The only thing that's really different is that we called column I secondary denominator info rather than denominator diagnosis code. The secondary denominator info is basically any supplemental information that's required to determine if an exam goes into the denominator of a measure that can't be captured by the CPT code. So for most of these measures, you're going to give us a CPT code and then some additional code, which is either going to be an ICD-10 diagnosis code, or it's going to be just kind of a made up code like CMS uses for MIPS measures. For example, for ACRAD 40, that made up code will tell us that this was a prostate screening or prostate surveillance exam. That's something that the CPT code doesn't capture. And again, if you are reporting via simplified submission, this does not require you to be registered for GRID. You just upload it directly through the MIPS portal. But I do want to stress that the turnaround time measures can't be submitted using this method. They have to submit using the GRID registry, using that standard exam level template. And now I'll talk a little bit about MIPS measure submission. This is something you're probably already familiar with, but since the portal is open and ready for your submissions, I do want to quickly go over this just to jog your memory. So this is where you'll go to submit both MIPS measures, and if you're submitting simplified Grid 2.0 measures, you'll do all of this here. It's also where you go to view your performance scores throughout the year. It's where you go to submit your data to CMS once the entire year is wrapped up. All of it is under the MIPS participation portal. So the first thing you do is you log into your standard NRDR account, and then under your registries, you'll click on MIPS participation portal. From there, it'll load this page here. To get to the actual portal for data submission and looking at your performance reports and all that, click on data collection and reports. Now, I do want to point out that we also have an interactive quality measure report, which is similar to some of the interactive reports for other registries. So that's another way you can kind of review your performance in MIPS. But for the purposes of data submission and also CMS submission, you'll want to click on data collection and reports. And that'll take you to a page that looks like this. You'll click on upload data along the top to upload either your MIPS measure files or your simplified submission files. That's the Grid 2.0 or the MSN measures. And you'll upload your file here, and you'll see on the right side a list of different upload statuses. So these usually take about 24 hours to process. So you'll upload a file, it might say processing for a while, but it hasn't actually been fully processed, and you won't know for sure if it was successfully uploaded just yet. If you see successful, that means all the records went through. If you see successful with warning, that means all the records went through, but there was maybe some information missing. And if you see rejected, that means there was just a problem outright with the file. Either the file format was incorrect, the file name was named incorrectly, or just every record in the file was invalid. So here's an overview of how to make sure those files are accepted. So we do have these specification documents that tell you exactly how to format your files and how to name your files to make sure they're accepted. So some common errors that come up are the file name is invalid. It could also be that you haven't added a physician to your physician list, but you put them on your spreadsheet, and we just recognize that they're an invalid physician because they're not enrolled in MIPS. It could also be the TIN is invalid, the NPI is invalid, or there are just data fields missing that make it impossible for us to calculate a measure. So you could say, leave out a CPT code. If that's missing, then we don't know what to do with that record. And if you leave out a numerator code, it will say successful with warning, which means that we were able to put the case into the denominator, but because there was no numerator given, we're not able to calculate whether this was performance met or performance not met. So if you see rejected or successful with warning, all you need to do is look at your log file, which I'll show you in just a minute how to review. But that log file will give you a list of all of your records that had an error, and it'll tell you exactly what that error was and how to fix it. If you fix the error, you just go re-upload the file and it will overwrite the old file. And this is what you see when you're looking at your upload data screen. This is going to show you a list of every file that you've uploaded, along with their status, the number of records that were in that file. It'll tell you how many of those records were rejected, how many were added, how many were just updated, or in other words, overwritten. And if there were any that were added with warning, you can see that here too. Now to download your log file, you just go over to the action column here and click on that icon there, and it'll bring up a short drop-down menu. Just click on download log file. That'll download an Excel file which only shows you the cases which had an error. If cases were successful and they were loaded with no problems, then they're not going to show up in your log file. It's only the cases that had a problem that'll show up there. So you scroll to the end of your log file, it'll tell you exactly what the issue was, whether it was, physician NPI is invalid, CPT code was invalid, numerator missing, whatever it may be. So we definitely recommend looking at those files if you see anything like rejected or successful with warning. Once you've actually uploaded data, you can then go look at your performance report to see how you're scoring on all of your measures. This is something that's available year-round, so we recommend both submitting data throughout the year and looking at your performance report throughout the year. This is the best way to identify if there's been a problem with the data that you've uploaded. If the denominator number is looking incorrect, if your performance score is looking incorrect. All of that can be viewed in the performance report. So this shows you all of your MIPS measures and QCDR measures. So if you're submitting the grid turnaround time measures, those will show up here too. If you're submitting the DIR measure, ACRAD 34, that'll show up here as well. And it'll show you a breakdown of your score both at the group level and by individual physician. So you can see how each physician is scoring and how the overall group is scoring, which may help you determine whether you want to submit as a group or submit as individuals. And it also lets you compare your scores against the historical CMS benchmark if the measure has one. So you'll see exactly how your score falls in that in those 10 deciles, and you'll see what decile you fall under, which determines how many points you're getting for that measure. Now, this takes about 24 hours to update after you've uploaded MIPS data. So do give it some time. If you upload data today, check your performance report tomorrow, and you should see those measures showing up there. And again, the portal is open for submission. We keep it open year round, but we typically don't start calculating performance scores until April, which is when the previous year's MIPS performance year has finally wrapped up. So you can upload data anytime. Now the performance report is updating correctly. It's showing you your scores based on the most up-to-date benchmarks. So if you haven't already started uploading data, please go ahead and get started if you're able. I also wanted to touch on the CMS QCDR audit, which is something that we are required to do. We certainly don't enjoy doing it, but it's part of our requirements in order to be able to continue being a QCDR, we have to select a random number of TINs and NPIs that are submitting data to us, and we have to audit a selection of their exams. Now, we're required to audit everything that you submit, so that includes quality measures, improvement activities, and promoting interoperability if applicable. Now, the quality measure audit is definitely the most intensive part of the audit. This is where we ask you to upload specific patient cases that you've uploaded in your MIPS files. We look at those reports and we verify the denominator information is correct. So, for example, the patient age matches what you entered into the spreadsheet, the date matches what was on the spreadsheet, and then we validate the numerator. So if you said you met performance for this case, we're looking at the final report to see if you indeed did meet performance for that case. Now, for the improvement activities and promoting interoperability, it's a little easier to do that part of the audit. The CMS data validation criteria will tell you exactly what's required if we audit you for IAs. Now, the audit will begin in August and it'll continue through the year. So we haven't started making any audit selections yet, but beginning in August, we will start reaching out to sites. So if you are selected for the audit, we just want to remind you that it is quality and improvement activities. I know most people aren't submitting promoting interoperability, so that may not be an issue for you, but we are auditing everything that you're submitting. And sort of related to the audit, I wanted to reiterate the changes to the DIR measure, ACRAD 34, related to secondary capture, because this is an issue that we noticed over the course of our audits. Now, we've stated this in previous webinars, and we've also sent emails out to DIR users notifying them of this change. So hopefully this isn't news to you. But as of January 1st of this year, we're no longer accepting data submitted by secondary capture. We're only submitting RDSRs, only accepting RDSRs for ACRAD 34. So we definitely recommend checking your secondary capture volume. So if you've been submitting a lot of data using secondary capture, this is now going to be subtracted from the numerator for ACRAD 34. What this means is that you'll get a lower data completeness for that measure. Now, the data completeness is still required to be 70% or greater. So if you don't fall below 70%, then it's not going to affect your score. But if you do fall under 70%, then the measure will be subject to lower scoring for you. And that can mean you'll get between 0 and 3 points, depending on what special statuses you may have. But effectively, it's going to make that measure worthless if you're under 70%. So here's how you can check your DIR reports to make sure your volumes of RDSR are acceptable. So what you'll do is go to your NRDR homepage, nrdr.acr.org, and under your registries, you'll click on DIR. From there, you'll see a list of interactive reports, and what you'll want to do is click on the CT Standardized Dose Index. From there, you'll look at the exam search tab, choose your corporate account and whatever facilities you want to look at, and then set the date range to January 1st through the present day. Then you'll select the RPIDs that are relevant to ACRAD 34, which are the head, chest, and abdomen RPIDs you see listed here. And once you apply those filters, you'll see a pie chart come up that looks like this, where in blue, it shows you the percentage submitted via RDSR, and the red is what's submitted via secondary capture. And what you're looking for is that RDSR percentage is greater than 70. If it's less than 70, then that means your data completeness is going to be less than 70. In the case of this screenshot here, this person has about 9% data submitted by secondary capture and about 91% submitted by RDSR. That means they would be fine. They would be still eligible for up to 10 points for that measure. So this is an example of a site that doesn't necessarily need to take any action to change how they're submitting data. Now, we certainly recommend resubmitting by RDSR if you're able to, but this particular case wouldn't be a big problem. So if you look at your interactive reports and you see that you're submitting a large enough percentage of secondary capture that it may actually reduce your completeness below 70%, then we recommend switching to full RDSR submission right away. And if you can, try resubmitting all of that secondary capture data using RDSR. If you need help with that, just contact our DIR team at DIR@acr.org. And before we go into the Q&A, I just want to go over some of the key dates. Now, January 1st, 2022, that's when the performance period began. So you could have started submitting data for 2022 right then if you wanted to. Now, October 31st is the next important deadline. This is the deadline to begin submitting data to whichever registries you intend to use. This doesn't mean you have to have your full year of data submitted. It just means you have to have started submitting data. So especially if you're new to some of the registries, we have a lot of people that are new to the GRID registry this year. We strongly encourage you to start submitting right away, just so that you can troubleshoot any issues that may come up. I know that there's a bit of a learning curve for submitting data to any new registry. So just to make sure you're not finding out that you're having trouble with it right at the very end of the year when we're already starting to move towards CMS submission. Now, December 31st is when the MIPS performance period ends, and then you're going to have another month to kind of get all your data wrapped up. And if there are any corrections that you need to make, any data that you haven't submitted yet, we want you to have that all finalized by January 31st of next year. So by the end of January, we really want you to have all of your data totally finalized, and hopefully at that point, you don't need to upload any additional data or make any corrections to what you've already submitted. Now, we do still allow you to do that. If there are problems with your data, then we still accept submissions. So don't panic, but just try to have everything finished by January 31st. Then you would have the entire month of February to basically look at your data, look at how you're performing on all your measures, see if you need to make any corrections to what you've uploaded, and then you can finalize your selections and submit it to CMS. Now, you have until March 31st to get that done. Obviously, the earlier the better, but March 31st is the final deadline for submitting your 2022 data to CMS. It's typically 8 p.m. Eastern time on March 31st. And then, as usual, you'll sometime in the summer of next year receive your 2022 final scores, which will tell you how you performed this year and how what kind of payment adjustment you're going to get based on your score. So if you'd like to contact us, we can always answer your support tickets at nrdrsupport.acr.org. We also have a large volume of articles that were written about how to submit data for different registries, how to review reports. All sorts of things are addressed in those articles at nrdrsupport.acr.org. You can also email us at nrdrsupport@acr.org or just give us a call. And of course, you can visit our QCDR page, acr.org/QCDR, for resources such as the list of measures, list of measure codes, the simplified submission specifications are there as well. Basically anything you need to get started with registering for MIPS, submitting data for MIPS, anything like that is on the QCDR page there. So with that, we can move on to Q&A. Let me take a look at our Q&A box and just see what kind of questions we have.
Zach, this is Sam. There's one question that just came in. It's from Liberty McMacken, and they want to know if they can submit as many measures as they want. And it is just asking for confirmation as to whether or not CMS would only take the scores, the measure of the 6 highest scores.
There's also a question in chat from Stacy Webb. What determines whether you are a large or small practice? Number of physicians?
I see that. Okay. So let me address Liberty's question first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I thought I was answering it, but I had muted myself. So
Oh,
anyway, that is correct, Liberty. You can submit as many measures as you can, and we definitely still recommend doing that. But as always, CMS takes the top 6. Now, in the event that you're submitting a non-benchmarked measure, we definitely recommend submitting those because they might get a same-year benchmark. And if it does get a same-year benchmark, and say you get 10 points for one of these non-benchmarked measures, then it will replace one of the 6 that CMS originally selected for you. So what you see when you submit to CMS is sort of a preliminary score, which is just, we take a guess at what your top 6 are going to be. But those non-benchmark measures could replace one of the original 6 if you score higher. Now, for Stacy's question, what determines whether you're a large or small practice? It is based on the number of physicians, but what you should really do is look at the QPP participation lookup. That's one of the CMS websites. You can put in a physician's NPI, and that'll tell you if your practice is considered small or rural, all of the special statuses that determine whether you're exempt from certain categories. That's also where you can see if you're considered non-patient facing. All that information is on the QPP participation lookup. If you just Google that, it'll come up for you.
And there's one other question in the Q&A right now, and it's just asking about whether the slides will be emailed or where they might be able to be found after tonight.
Yep, I will email a recording and a copy of the slides to everybody who registered. So be looking out for that, probably, if not tomorrow, then early next week.
Can I address Shalene's question about administrative claims measures?
Mm-hmm.
She had attributed to her group the hospital-wide 30-day all-cause unplanned readmission measure. There's currently, I think, 3 administrative claims measures for MIPS, and I think one was just introduced this year, so I'm not sure if that's really a part of 2022, because a slide presentation that CMS had on 2022 didn't include this 3rd one, but the unplanned readmission is one that's been around for a while, and the 2nd one that has been in place at least since last year was the risk standardized complication rate following elective primary total hip arthroplasty or total knee arthroplasty, and that one is much less likely to be attributed to radiology groups. I'm actually surprised that Shalene's group had the unplanned readmission measure attributed, and it's likely that you have primary care E&M codes billed, maybe from interventionalists or other types of providers in your group, that because it is the attribution methodology is very heavily weighted for primary care or other specialists that may admit people, obviously. So I have not heard from anyone else having that measure attributed to them, but it is right. You're right, Shalene, is similar to some of the cost measure, like the Medicare spending per beneficiary. If you have E&M claims, that it could be attributed to you. We can give you some references about the measures so you can see the coding of it and determine better whether they may be attributed to you in the future. But there's some information on the QPP website, but it's kind of hard to locate the details of the measure, but we can pull those together for you.
Thanks, Judy. We've got a few questions in Q&A and then another question in chat. So Let me start with, I know we had a question from Jamie, which I think Sam just answered over text, but Jamie was asking when 2023 information will be available. And I just want to let everybody know, usually around July, CMS releases the proposed rule for 2023 quality payment program. That's when they'll make some proposals for changes, and then they'll give organizations like us and the public an opportunity to respond to their proposals. And then usually around November, they release the final rule. So it's not until November that we know for sure what's going to change for next year. Although the proposed rule usually gives us some idea of what's going to happen for the next year. Now, Liberty is asking, is it okay to submit an EUC application just in case you're concerned about getting a negative adjustment? I mean, that's kind of a tricky question. I mean, you can submit an EUC application, certainly, and what CMS will do is look at your application and they'll ultimately make the determination whether they want to grant you that EUC. So I expect that you have to have some sort of rationale for why you feel that that you need the EUC exemption. So you just need to be prepared to explain that to CMS. We have a question about the grid turnaround time measures. This is from an anonymous person. When submitting grid TATs, you must be part of the grid registry, but do you still need to submit the monthly and yearly data for facility and physician? No, you don't. You only need to submit the exam level data for the grid turnaround times. So the facility and monthly forms are not factored into that. You just have to do the exam level submission. Thank you for that question.
Zach, there's also Stacy Webb asked another question in the chat. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that.
Yeah, I just saw that one. So this is a good question, Stacy. So you're saying we have one physician who only reads PET scans. If we submit as a group, no issue. However, if we submit individually, is she exempt from participation? So you are correct. If you're submitting as a group, then she will be attributed the group score, and no worries. If you're deciding to submit individually, the first thing I would do is, again, go back to that QPP participation lookup. It might be that she does not have a high enough volume to be required to participate in MIPS. If that's the case, then yes, she's exempt. You don't have to submit anything on her behalf. If she is listed as MIPS eligible, then you might want to look into how to meet the requirements for her. One thing we weren't able to get into today, but I will talk about on later webinars, is the CMS, what they call the EMA, which stands for Eligible Measure Applicability. And this is basically something for physicians that aren't able to meet 6 measures. What CMS does is they look at whether they submitted all the measures that they possibly could have. So if they submitted 3 measures, but those were the only 3 they could possibly submit, then CMS kind of adjusts their score as if they made a full submission. Now, the catch about the EMA is that participants using the Qualified Clinical Data Registry don't have that option. This is only available to people using what they call qualified registries, which are a different thing. Qualified registries only have access to the MIPS measures. They don't have QCDR measures at all. So that is what I would recommend for a group or an individual who are not able to meet the 6 measures using QCDR. Now, again, in your case, hopefully this person is just exempt from MIPS in general, and the QPP participation lookup will tell you that. If you put in her NPI, it'll tell you exactly what her requirements are. And so I see your note here, Liberty. So, I think a lot of practices are kind of in this, finding themselves in this situation where they don't have enough measures available, and the measures that are available are capped at 7 points. And so it is really hard to hit that 75-point threshold. The only thing I can recommend is, see if using the QCDR measures could help you out, because I think a lot of people would be eligible for those turnaround time measures, at least some of the turnaround time measures. And again, all of those are benchmarked. They can get you a score of up to 10 points. So that could help. If you've only got a handful of MIPS measures available to you, but you're able to supplement that with a few more QCDR measures, that could definitely get you over 75 points. But it is worth looking into the EUC exemption if you think that you could qualify for it and you want to try to be exempt from MIPS for this year. And Liberty's asking if she reports 5 turnaround time measures, does that count for 5 of the 6 measures? And the answer is yes. So if you submit 5 turnaround time measures and 4 MIPS measures, that would be 9 measures. And then again, CMS would take the top 6 for you. So there's no downside to adding those QCDR measures. We definitely recommend it, and we've been having a lot more people reach out to us and say, how can we get set up to submit grid data, because the MIPS measures alone aren't going to cut it for us. So if you'd like to get set up with grid, then send us an email, and we're happy to put you in touch with our registration team or our grid support people. Any of them can help you get that added to your account and start submitting data. And we're also just happy to give you some more information offline, so you can look at those measures more closely and see if they would be applicable to you. And sorry, I see we have another question from Liberty here. How do you get 75 points if you only have 6 measures with 10 possible points? Let me go back to my little math slide here, and that'll hopefully explain that. It is pretty confusing. Here we go. So I'm trying to think how to explain this. So the quality category for most radiologists is gonna be eligible for up to 85 points. That's if you're a regular size practice and you have PI and cost reweighted. So the way they calculate that is, yes, you can only get up to 60 points for quality, but if you get 60 points out of 60, then that basically counts as a 100 for your quality score. And then that 100 is applied to the weight of 85%, which would give you 85%. So if you score 60 out of 60, then you're going to get 85 points, if that makes sense. So you can use this equation here to figure out exactly how you need to score on each measure to reach that 75-point threshold. Jamie's asking, I have a small imaging center that does not have enough regular MIPS measures. We could report turnaround times, but they wouldn't be great. Is it worth not registering for QCDR so that we may be eligible for EMA? That is possible. If you look at your turnaround times and you think that using those measures wouldn't be beneficial to you, then it might be best to look into a qualified registry. Now, the CMS benchmarks are posted, so you can look at those turnaround time benchmarks. There are the ACRAD 15 through 25 measures. So if you look at the CMS benchmarks, you can maybe get some idea of whether your scores would put you in the range of 8, 9, or 10 points, or whether you would be more likely to only get 3 or 4 points for those measures. So definitely worth looking into. If you're considering trying to get that EMA, then I would say send CMS an email. Their email is qpp@cms.hhs.gov. I know they've got that email posted on their website as well. So it's worth reaching out to them just to make sure you would be correctly applied that that EMA. All right, I don't see any other questions yet. Let me go back to our contact us page. I'll give it just another minute to see if we get any more questions. Thank you so much for all the really good questions today. And again, we will be having some more webinars coming up. We've been discussing possibly having a webinar just focused on some of our high participation measures and trying to explain kind of how to make sure you're meeting performance for those measures. So be looking out for that. We'll probably discuss measure 145, 405, and 436, because those measures, a lot of people are submitting them, and they also have been kind of a problem area for some people on our audits. So you know, we'll make sure to send that invitation out whenever we've gotten it scheduled. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, so I just want to say thanks again. We really appreciate you joining us today, and be looking out in your email for recording and the slides if you need those. All right, have a great day and a happy Memorial Day weekend. Thanks.